WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us. We Should Know is on the air each and every Tuesday at 2:30. We come to you from Star Communications, Channel 16, also on WCLN Radio. There's a summation of the Sampson Weekly newspaper. We want to thank you for your comments on the show last week. Also, your continued suggestions to weshouldknow@gmail.com. We appreciate those comments and suggestions about things you would like to know more about. Today we're talking about something that has really been kind of tickling the airwaves for some time. An old friend has come back to talk to us, Dr. Tom Melton. Dr. Melton is the Deputy Director of the North Carolina Cooperative Extension Service at North Carolina State University. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Botany, a Master's in Ag, and also he has a PhD in Plant Pathology from the University of Illinois. Tom, thank you for being back.
Oh, I'm happy to.
Yeah, always good, especially on a beautiful day. Come to Clinton and have a conversation with us. One of the things I wanted to kind of start the conversation with, it seems that just at the end of 2018, maybe October, November, December, there's just all of a sudden a lot of media bulletins and articles has just hit the airwaves about hemp, about cannabis, and about marijuana, in that order. And, and the last time we talked, you kind of cleared the field for us to help us understand what hemp was versus the other related cousins, should I say. What is happening in the world of hemp, and where are we? Are we seeing a uptick in the number of people getting involved? Kind of give us a ballpark on that.
Yeah, it's, it varies across the country. So, I would say hemp is increasing in popularity all across the country, but it'll depend on the individual states as far as, their laws and, how rapidly it's adapted. In North Carolina, our hemp is definitely increasing. We're up, we have about 6,100 licensed licensed acres right now, and about 4,500 licensed growers. But we have a situation where some growers are kind of sharing their license a little bit, so there's probably a few more than that. But on the other side of that figure, just because they have a license doesn't necessarily mean they grew hemp. It's a complicated thing. It's, as you said, it's really expanded a lot. There's a lot of money in hemp and CBD and marijuana now. And of course, a lot of that money started in the marijuana markets out west, but they've transferred in here. So they're really, really pushing it. There's all sorts of publications on industrial hemp now in North Carolina even. So yeah, it's really increasing.
One of the things that struck me as I was looking back at some of the current literature, over 32 states or 32 plus states now are doing some form of hemp, cannabis, or marijuana. That's grown significant since the last visit you've had with us, and that was last June or July, but that's been a significant uptick from what I recall us talking about then, because it seemed like it was about 10 or 12.
Yeah, it's more than doubled since then. It's amazing. I think with the Farm Bill coming through, that's given a lot of people, a lot of industries more hope. I get a lot of industry newsletters and been contacted by a lot of research companies. There's research companies out there and finance companies wanting to put millions and millions of dollars into this. There's a lot of folks out there who've been a little fearful because they've seen these other crops and commodities come through, sunflowers, various types of things that have come through and promised the world, and in a year or two they're gone. But I've never in my career seen something come through that had this much money behind it, and I think that might make the difference.
And I think we talked a bit about that. That was one of the key points I wanted to talk about as well. I, like a lot of folks that listens to this show, grew up into the world of broadleaf tobacco in eastern North Carolina, and it was the king crop for years and years and years. Some people, when they see hemp now, they see cannabis, they see marijuana, they relate to me that, look, we have the atmosphere, we have the soil type, we have somewhat the skeletal industry still in place. Talk to us about that and the difference in where we live in North Carolina and North Carolina as a whole compared to other states as it relates to the potential for making this should I say, a cash boom crop.
Right. Well, I think that we do have a lot of advantages. I don't think that means we're going to end up being necessarily the top dog. We may, because it's a very adaptable crop. So it can be grown a lot of different ways in a lot of different places. But where we do have a big advantage is it can be grown just like tobacco very successfully, or even almost just like sweet potatoes very successfully. So obviously we have a lot of experience in both of those. It can be started or even finished in a greenhouse, and we have a lot of greenhouse space around. It can be dried down with a little bit of heat in an old tobacco barn. It's very critical that it gets dried. So yeah, we do have that. And some of the growers that have tried it a couple different ways now, very good former tobacco growers, initially tried it under plastic because that's the way a lot of folks in the West have told us to do it. Of course, they're not as wet as we are in the West. So under plastic strips, for most folks that have done that, said they're not going to do that again. And the ones that have had a second year on it have had a lot of success transplanting it and then hilling it up just like tobacco, and they've indicated that has worked really well.
The history with tobacco, I recall as a young guy going to pull tobacco plants, and they were under these large canvases. It was, besides some of the very rich soil areas that were more moist in the fields. Can cannabis or hemp be grown with that same type growing of plants and then transplant them?
Yes, and I definitely remember those times of the plant beds. Of course, the tobacco growers went to the greenhouses to produce their transplants, and that's how these hemp, they call them clones typically instead of transplants. They're not grown from seed. They're typically cuttings off of what they call mother plants. So they'll keep a large pot with a large plant it's kind of like their special plant, and they make cuttings and root those into small cells generally with a spongy-like material in there instead of a soil. And then those root a little bit, and then they sell them and they can be transplanted.
So one of the things then that we get to in this process that seems to be somewhat of the crossroads as we talk about, and in my mind I'm looking at it from three different kind of plant types, comes that conversation about THC and the relative content of THC, which from previous comments you've made, the THC with what we refer to as hemp is extremely low particulate-wise as it is with the other. Talk to us about that a bit, and how hard would it be for, quote, a hemp grower, one of these several thousand that is out there now that have license to grow, to transcend that gap between hemp, cannabis, or marijuana?
Okay. So, when we first think about those three items, the cannabis, hemp, marijuana, first thing we got to really realize is biologically it's all the same thing. So cannabis is the genus for both hemp and for marijuana. In fact, it's the same species. It's Cannabis sativa typically is what you see. The only difference between hemp and marijuana is the amount of THC. So if it's 0.3% THC or below, it's hemp. If it's above 0.3%, then it's marijuana. And that was actually just a kind of a random, non-scientific number that someone came up with one day, and it's stuck, and that's what all the laws are on. You typically have to have about 5% THC in order for someone to smoke a fair amount of it and have any high or psychoactive effect. Commercial marijuana these days is up closer to 15 to 25%. So there's quite a factor. 0.3%, if the teenager runs out and tries to grab a bunch of it out of the field and smoke it, they're just going to get a sore throat. Nothing's going to happen.
He's going to have an all-day job.
Yeah, right. So that's very important to understand that. As far as switching from one to another, growing, the way we would grow industrial hemp here in the field is exactly the same way you would grow marijuana. So, in fact, last year, the CBD market was actually stronger than the marijuana market because the marijuana market had overproduced out west. And many of the Oregon marijuana growers just switched right over to growing industrial hemp for CBD because it's pretty much exactly the same thing.
Since you brought that up, let's talk about what that is for a moment. Is that the cannabis oil?
Yeah, the CBD is the industrial hemp or marijuana plant produces a number of chemical compounds called cannabinoids. Some people say up to 100 different ones. THC is one of those. Cannabidiol or CBD is the other one that we're most concerned with and know that much about. But there's a bunch more in there. The CBD or cannabidiol is what this market has turned into. We thought at one point it would be fiber and seed and some other things, but the cannabidiol is what that's the quick cash, the easy money. So
I just want to add in that from what I've read just over the past 3 or 4 months, it's been very much increased in the demand for that CBD. That folks are saying, look, this is something we've got to have. I mean, it's relatively next to a magic pill when it comes to certain illnesses.
Right. And let me back up. I said quick money. People feel like it's quick money. I'm not saying it's quick money. There's a lot. If you go on the internet and read about CBD, you can find out that there's probably somebody out there that says it made something better for just, it could do just about anything. It sounds a little like a snake oil to some degree, but there is some research behind some parts of it. Epilepsy is one of the things that it's known to control. Anxiety tends to be one of the things that seems to be pretty widely accepted. It controls. And when you get much beyond that, pain is another one, cancer pain. Some people have claimed it's better than opioids and could help with that situation. But there's not a lot of hard data beyond the epilepsy thing. So, but good, pretty good feedback. So
we're going to take our first break, and then we're going to come back. I want to kind of follow that train of thought a little bit and look at where the market may be going with this, and maybe hypothesize a bit about what we think about it.
Okay, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. We're talking with Dr. Tom Melton, North Carolina State University. We're talking about cannabis, hemp, things you need to know about.
Experiencing slow internet? If you have a fast internet package, the problem is most likely your wireless router. With more devices using Wi-Fi, your wireless router may not be able to deliver the speed and coverage you need. We now have the leading solution to enhance your internet experience. Using small devices in a mesh network, these Wi-Fi appliances cover just about any size home so that all your devices can operate to their fullest potential. Whole home Wi-Fi from Star Communications. Get the most out of your internet connection.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. We Should Know is on the air. If you're just tuning in, or you maybe are going down the road listening to us on the radio, you just flipped your TV on to Channel 16. We are talking with Dr. Tom Melton. He's Deputy Director, North Carolina State University Extension Service. Tom, you've been with us several times. We've been talking about this subject of hemp. In one of our original conversations, and just in the first part, we moved very quickly from an understanding that cannabis is somewhat the key particulate here, and the cousins or the children of that are hemp and marijuana. It's all the same family. They all live in the same house. So you see these derivatives coming up. And one article that I pulled, of course, from our one of our magazines, newspapers in Raleigh, News and Observer, was written in a very positive note, and it was kind of almost like, well, finally, marijuana is here. It looks like the state of North Carolina is going in that direction. How far are we from kind of accepting some sense of reality that the wave of states that now are pushing this, that have stepped on board, and is the determining factor going to be a financial resource decision for the state? And when I see the numbers of people signing up for licenses, the state's already generating revenue with that, several thousand people trying to sign up for licenses. But the big issue again, is this going to be a money-driven decision, or what's going to drive that decision to say, okay, let's open the door and make this happen?
So I think on the hemp side of things, with the Farm Bill opening the door and making industrial hemp so it is not a controlled substance. Marijuana would still be a controlled substance, but hemp is not. That just makes it a lot easier for everybody. It makes it so when we apply, and what comes next now is that we will set up a program the NCDA will, and put together a program and send that to the USDA to approve. And then once we get that back, then that program will take the place of the current hemp program we have, which is an experimental pilot program from the previous Farm Bill. So it will no longer be an experimental pilot program. It will be an accepted, non-controlled crop, but you will still have to have a license, probably, and there will still be THC testing to make sure that people aren't just growing marijuana, because marijuana would still be illegal here. So if you look at the industry, the CBD industry, which is very pro-CBD, quite honestly, it's hard to get a non-biased forecast, because the industry is growing rapidly and trying to get more people into the industry. So the economic forecasts you see for hemp are all very positive. There's one bar graph out there that basically shows the demand doubling every year for the next 4 to 5, at least doubling for the next 4 to 5 years. Because a lot of people are concerned that we'll overproduce, and we may. I think that is a possibility, but with the demand doubling every year, you obviously have to have quite a bit of product as well.
On the subject of growth and over capacity or going beyond the demand, again, back to my roots, as it would be, tobacco, broadleaf tobacco. There was something called allotments back then, of which I know little or probably not a whole lot about, but I do know that there were allotments. You could only grow so many acres of tobacco based on the number of acres of property or something of that nature. Do you see at some point in the future some questioning, as although this thing is unfolding rapidly, do you see someone saying, wait a minute, we need to kind of hold here and look at potentially doing allotments on the growth of this product, not so much in the sense of restrictiveness, but more in the sense of controlling the commodity to ensuring that the farmer has adequate income?
Yeah, and I don't know. I would say that would be something the industry as a whole would probably have to lobby pretty hard for at the federal level. Doing it in the state wouldn't help, because then other states would just produce as much as they wanted to.
Yeah, it would have to be on a national level, all or nothing.
Right. And I would say it's something probably the industry would have to really push hard for. I don't think the federal government would have necessarily the desire to institute a new program, so to speak, without a lot of push and reasoning behind it. I would say that'd be farther down the road. I think it would probably be a good thing for the growers. Obviously, those sorts of things always are good for the growers. The consumers, of course, would argue that would keep the prices artificially high, and this is a very consumer-oriented commodity.
Well, the amounts, the monetary money for a license to grow and those kinds of things, I read somewhere, seem to be relatively reasonable, around $250, that kind of thing. I mean, it's not like it's $8,000–$10,000. It's reasonable. So you could actually say a lot of people are going to be intrigued with the idea of, quote, going ahead and getting my license, or going ahead to try an acre or a half an acre. Is that what you're seeing happening with these several thousand?
So some have tried a very small amount, like an acre or even a few square feet in greenhouses. We've talked about that a lot, but you can grow the entire plant out in a greenhouse. And in a greenhouse situation, you can do several crops in a year. I had one person tell me 8 crops in a year. That seems hard to believe, but it's several crops anyway. So, if you are able to do that, and we keep pushing it farther along, there's going to be more and more money made. But it's going back to your question about will we overproduce? I want to quote Commissioner Troxler on that, and he says that North Carolina farmers can farm the profit out of anything. So
yeah, and I get that.
Yeah,
I guess growing up on a farm and having cucumbers and peppers and those kinds of things, I totally understand that.
Yeah.
We'd get to the market and, we're expecting $10, you get $2, and what are you going to do with it? You got more than that in the baskets.
Right.
So as we talk about this, I want to kind of get to a couple of other points, and I know simply I'm looking at it from the sense that people are going to ask. As a person looks at that, whether they're red tractor people, green tractor people, whatever color tractor, and we got a lot of folks that are farmers out there, and we're a very farm-friendly show, so they're going to want to know if I get into this and I try this, is it something that you see in your field of expertise that has the potential of someday equaling or even offsetting those sweet potatoes that you talked about? And of course, North Carolina still is what tobacco's #2 in North Carolina. So is the potential there in your crystal ball?
Yeah, I think there's some of the folks that are getting into it now, and that are getting paid and making good money. They're making, on a per acre basis, they're making more than they made on tobacco by quite a bit.
Wow.
If everything goes well, a gross value of CBD hemp in a field is $25,000 gross. Costs vary. The most expensive part of it is buying the transplants are very expensive. The clones are very expensive. But making, if everything goes well and you get paid in the end, making $5,000 on an acre is not unheard of at all. More than that in some cases, so it just depends. And so that's quite a bit more than tobacco. Now, I always hate when people come rushing into it. I've talked to people on the phone and people getting licenses, and they say, I see the numbers on this, I think this could save my farm. Well, I don't encourage anybody to go into this to save the farm. Yeah. There is a lot of risk. A lot of people have lost a lot of money on it. And most of the time, those are people who can afford to lose that money. Mm-hmm. So, I say first year in, don't do more than you can afford to lose. I think that's true. We say that for a lot of ventures. Absolutely. I'd say the vast majority of the people who have gotten in the first year, even the second year, are entrepreneurs. They're true entrepreneurs at heart. If you tend to be a little more conservative, I'd probably wait just a little bit till it gets a little sorted out. And we give recommendations on corn and soybeans and they're good because we've been growing it for over 100 years. Mm-hmm. This was our second year of growing industrial hemp in North Carolina, so we're all still learning.
And with that said, being the second year, the volume of what you just quoted, the number of people stepping up just for the second year even makes that number huge.
It is. It's terribly huge. In fact, we don't have good numbers on what the farm gate value of it is. But if you took that number of $15,000 to $25,000 and multiplied it times the number of acres, it's actually greater than all of North Carolina's fruit and nut production. So in the second year, so there is a lot of potential there. So I think it's the right way to go to keep pursuing it. I would just I worry about the small person that tries to do it. Put too much into it. So I say try it small and then go a little bit bigger.
And as you know, farmers are very good with math. They very well understand planning and those kinds of things. The question that I'm often asked, and in fact, when I had you on last time, a lot of folks would say, well, why didn't you ask him this and that and the other? And a lot of it built around that cash asset. You know, what can I depend on? And again, farmers having lived in that kind of world my whole life, farmers are very good at taking risks. Everything they do is risk.
Sure.
It's all driven to a large degree by Mother Nature, as we've seen with Florence and Matthew over the past 2 to 3 years. Those kinds of things I don't think will cause people to be hesitant.
Right.
The other area that seems to be strong, and you can speak to this, is the fact that the Farm Bill, and we're talking on the national level, did open some doors significantly. Yes. So that gives them, they just basically, from what I'm hearing from the folks I talk with, they're just basically not looking at guarantees, they're looking at some assurance that they can get on the playing field.
Right,
and,
right.
And they're not, you just put me out there, basically is what they're saying. Put me out there, coach, I'll win the game.
Right. And I think the thing that is most important there, getting into it, is getting in touch with a reliable processor, maybe not someone that just popped up this year. If they did, they came from somewhere else with some backing. They've got cash, they can cash flow out the processor, and getting a contract ahead of time if at all possible. But what you don't want to do, no matter how big a farmer you are, is go into it and then think you're going to sell it like you sell grain on an open market, because it isn't really working that way.
And it's not there yet. It might be there one day.
It might be, and you might get lucky and sell it, but I wouldn't take that chance.
We're going to take another break, and we'll be back. Ladies and gentlemen, we're taking our second break. We're kind of halfway through the show. Call a friend, stay tuned. We're talking about hemp, cannabis. We're talking with Dr. Tom Melton, North Carolina State University. Be right back.
You come out to replace a bad sensor, and that adds a 5-year commitment to my contract, and you don't tell me? Here's your sign.
Switch to the sign that's keeping homes secure and customers happy all over the area. Security from Star Communications. We pride ourselves on fair pricing and quick, friendly service every time.
Somebody try to break into this place?
Security from Star Communications.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I want to thank you for being with us today. I want to thank all those farmers and others that listen to us each and every day. If you are a farmer, I would encourage you to call a friend of yours, call a neighbor down the road or what have you, and tell them to tune in. You might be on a green tractor, red tractor, whatever in the field. The topic today touches a lot about what farming is and agriculture is, particularly here in the eastern part of the state of North Carolina. We're talking with Dr. Tom Melton, North Carolina State University. Tom, you've been there for some time. You've got the academic credentials. You've been a leader in the ag business at North Carolina State. It's just always great to sit down and have a conversation with you, and sometimes we can just talk forever. But we're talking about hemp today, and we're talking about the relative relationship between this word of cannabis, hemp, and marijuana, all in the same family, all sitting at the same table. For our people that are out there today, and they may be working fields, doing whatever farmers do, as you know, different seasons, but this has been on their radar. As you know better than anybody, there's been a number of meetings around the state already that's gone on, and one of the things you alluded to a while ago is to look at this from the sense of growing it, the capacity of the processor of the plant. So we've kind of spent our time for the first two segments here talking about, should I grow or should I not? And you've, I think, answered that with as much reason and rationality as anyone. And if I do, how much can I risk? And that's something they would have to decide. But the piece that you just mentioned before we went to break was the processing of the plant. The processing piece, two questions, if you will, kind of discuss it around this. The processing piece is obviously would be interest to somebody growing it because it's got to be processed somewhere. The second part of that is the processing piece something that either a farmer or a number of farmers should look at as maybe being part of the processing part?
Yes. Well, when we say processing, there could mean a lot of different things to different people. It could mean the fiber, doing the grain and all that, but let's just focus on the CBD since that's what 99% of the people are doing.
This is the consumable part, just to remind folks, this is the consumable part that folks has found that is beneficial to everything from stress to seizures and those kinds of things.
Right, some of which we don't have data on and some we do. So, exactly. The CBD itself it can be extracted in somebody's kitchen. So there are some methods to do it online, to extract in a very simple arrangement. But some of the chemical compounds that have to be used in those situations is probably things that most of us would not want to have in our bodies. Petroleum-based compounds, for example. The more reliable processors that are really doing it to sell are using a CO2 type processor. Mm-hmm. It's still not a huge piece of equipment, but it's all stainless steel, so there's some investment there. I don't actually know what they cost. But that's basically what we're talking about, is those people buying the raw hemp from the grower, basically the flowers. That's what we're talking about, is virtually all the CBD and THC right now is in the flowers. Mm-hmm. So they buy the flowers, and then they test the flowers. The processor will test the flowers. At minimum, they'll test them for CBD content, and that's part of the price that's paid. So the higher the CBD content, the higher the price. It's a quality thing like you think of with other crops. So they take those flowers and they can run it through the processing machine, and they end up with basically, it's called an oil, a CBD oil that's extracted from the trichomes of the flowers, and it's kind of an amber to brown liquid that'll just end up in a jar, and a jar of it is worth tons of money because it's
thousands of dollars.
Yeah, oh yeah, easily.
Because we're talking droppers
or tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah. So they end up with that, and then they will market that in various different ways. Now, can a farmer do that? Yes, and some farmers already are setting up their own processing facilities, because I think most farmers have learned in history that it's the middleman or the end guy that makes the money, right? So they don't want to make that mistake again, and if they've got enough money to get started, some of them are doing that. Now, ultimately, there's going to be so many of those people out there, it's going to probably have to sort down in some way.
Gets back to supply and demand.
Sure. And just sometimes a larger organization or a larger company can be more efficient in pricing issues and things like that. So it just depends. Where you run into some problems right now, technically, is that the FDA still does not allow, they say according to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, that it is not legal to put CBD in food products, or to be sold as a supplement, or to be put in topicals, or even in pet food. So the Food and Drug Administration still does not support the sales of CBD. Now, there's been very few cases where people have been arrested or anything along those lines. It's kind of gone, it's not undercover, the FDA knows about it, but no one's really pushed the issue. So I say that because part of the problem is with any food you eat, for example, the FDA has inspected those facilities, they've probably sampled some portions of the food, and everything
like
is
romaine lettuce or whatever.
Right, they watch all that. Well, they're not doing that with CBD and the food products with CBD because they don't recognize it as a legal product. So it's a little bit, it's a little bit buyer beware. Because you're consuming something that has had no regulatory oversight on it. So I would say too, for the processors, that they need to be sure that everything they do, just pretend like you are being inspected by an FDA food inspector, and make sure you understand all the FDA regulations for safe food and safe food processing, so that when you put out a product, you're putting out a safe product. I think that's very important. I think over time, the FDA, there's been some indication the FDA is probably going to try to come around on this issue, but as it stands now, that's the way it is.
And so kind of to back up on just the conversation at this point for clarification, the CBD it is available, and people can use that for seizures and those kinds of things. It's not regulated by the FDA, so therefore it's not acknowledged as, quote, legal for them to do, but yet they can still use it in North Carolina for seizures. So a very slippery slope here. That's the reason I'm trying to make sure that, the picture we're painting, that even I understand what's going on. But so the person that is doing this, yes, it's legal, but no, it's not been affirmed to be legal. The Farm Act has really moved this thing forward faster than the judiciary and the courts can even look at it.
Yeah, I'll try to clarify for you.
Please.
But if you get to the point where you understand, can we switch seats? So there's two agencies involved. There's the DEA. Well, there's three: DEA, USDA, and FDA. So before the Farm Act, the DEA controlled hemp and anything that came from hemp, CBD or whatever, any extracts. So once the Farm Bill went through and it was no longer a controlled substance, the oversight moved from the DEA to USDA. Gotcha. Now, USDA hasn't set up their rules on it yet, so we don't exactly know what they're going to do. But the FDA has not changed, so that they still have their same rules in place, which basically says, so USDA says it's legal now because it's not a controlled substance. CBD is legal. And hemp is legal. What is not legal, according to the FDA right now, is to put it into a food product or to sell it as a supplement or as a consumable. Right. So according to the FDA, all that's being sold out there is being sold illegally. They would say that's
according to the FDA.
According to FDA, they would say that all of that violates the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act. So we're operating in a very gray area. Yeah. Now, yes, is it being sold out there? I can walk down the street on Hillsborough Street in Raleigh, and there's a hemp shop there, and you can buy all you want there.
Or Wilmington.
Or Wilmington. I've been in the one in Wilmington. They're all over the place. They're in Charlotte, they're in Winston, and you can buy stuff online from North Carolina processors. So it's all out there. It's, I just make the point because I want to make sure the processors understand, the bigger ones do, but the small folks, that you're producing a food product that typically is would be inspected in the process, approved and everything by ultimately the FDA. It's actually done through NCCES Food and Drug, but you're not getting inspected, so you're not getting those tips or help on that. You just have to be really careful what you produce.
And that's the critical piece of it, is that, and I think you pointed out early on, is as this moves forward, there is a potential for some tremendous gain for farmers. But the other part of it is this sense that you have to be very cautious because it is a slippery slope. And at any given point in time, something may happen that creates a kind of a landslide that could take you away and everything else, which is exactly where farmers always find themselves. I mean, they're, to some reason, I don't think you could farm without being at least somehow comfortable with that environment.
Right. They're all risk takers, right? They're not conservative people. If they were conservative people, they'd be state employees like me.
Exactly.
But instead,
and we would retire and hope everything worked out.
Yeah, they're farmers, and so they're going to take those risks, and I think they're probably reasonable risk in most cases. I think even for the processors and the retail salespeople, I mean, they've got huge investments, and I think they're making money. I think as long as nobody gets sick, it'll keep floating along well. But if somebody does screw up and somebody gets sick, it's going to draw attention to it.
Absolutely. We're going to go. I won't hit you with another question right now, but we're fixing to go to our last break, last segment, and I want to kind of come back and not only wrap up in the sense of looking at what we've talked about, but clarifying as much as we can with what you know now. Where we are, because again, oftentimes I'm not necessarily bombarded because I enjoy people asking me questions, but I have people asking me questions, or you should ask him this and that kind of thing. I want to try to cover as much as I can, because when I have folks like you that have the background and expertise, it's wonderful and so forth to have you here to be able to answer some of these things, and going forward to clear the path as much as we can for those folks that are willing to step up and take that risk.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. We're talking with Dr. Tom Melton. If you're in the farming business, and most likely you are if you're listening to this show, this is something you need to know about. We'll be back in a moment. Call a friend, stay tuned.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're coming up on our last segment here on the show called We Should Know. Each and every week at Tuesday on 2:30, Star Communications Channel 16, WCLN Radio. And of course, as a summation of the Sampson Weekly newspaper, we're talking with Dr. Tom Melton, North Carolina State University. Tom, this is a big conversation. When you get into hemp, and you get into what cannabis is, you look at it as all these, the table of the family of cannabis, and hemp and marijuana being part of that. We've talked about a lot of issues, and we're coming up on this last segment, and I want to kind of follow up a little bit on the discussion for farmers out there, because we've already agreed that farmers are risk takers. If they wouldn't be into business, would they? So the piece that struck me as we went to break and during break and our short conversation was some of the most successful operations in agriculture, particularly in the eastern part of the state, has been those companies that have been, for example, livestock, poultry. They're set up and designed in a system. So you've got the grower of the livestock, if it's hogs or chickens or whatever. Then you've got a system set up that integrator then takes care of recommendation, monitoring, ensuring that you're producing and doing what you need to do. And so the farmer then is very connected to the integrator. Then you move it to the processing plant. Is that what we're really saying with cannabis? Is that if there is a system in place that the farmer would likely be much more successful?
Well, I will say that for people that are new into it, I think that's a good system for them, and there is some of that. There's a couple cooperatives out there that have come together, and they buy the plants together, and they provide recommendations, and they end up buying the product and as a whole and trying to sell it again. And you also see that with some of the retail companies, the larger retail companies. They'll actually come in and help the grower buy the plants and go all the way through, and you sell back to the same people. So we are seeing some of that, and that makes a lot of sense for a new product that there isn't a lot of information on, because they do have some information. You follow theirs, they're going to buy it from you, right? Right. It does make sense. They're not all doing that. There's a lot of independent folks out there too, just making arrangements and getting everything themselves. So it's both ways right now. I don't know how it will end up, but it's both ways now. And some farmers like the integration, and some farmers don't like the integration.
Because typically ag folks, again, are very independent people.
Yes. So it just kind of depends. I'll go back to one of the parts of it is buying the plants, the transplants, or they call clones in this industry. And the clones are pretty expensive. They can range, the price goes down a lot with quantity, but you're still probably looking at $3 to $5 a plant in most cases, but as high as $8 to $10 a plant for small numbers. So you multiply that out, and that's a big expense. We have bought a lot of clones from other states, but as you say, our farmers are smart. And they've gotten out there, and especially some of the guys with greenhouses have started producing their own clones. Now, those are some people that are coming in with some money. They're making money, and it's for sure money, because you've got to pay me to get these plants, right?
Absolutely.
So that side's going.
So that's
well.
one piece of this monetary process that folks need to look at as a lucrative potentiality, and that is growing the clones.
Yes, and some of our nursery and landscape people have actually even gotten into this. So, they say, well, we've got the solid green, we can do this. But, there's no reason why we couldn't do it in the tobacco and areas too.
Yeah, and some of these folks, as you just mentioned, that are into growing plants, you see these huge 10,000 gallons or larger propane tanks, and as you mentioned a while ago, oftentimes they will have more than 2 or 3 growing seasons in that one greenhouse. So with the thought of just say $10 a plant, and you start doing the math at 10,000 plants, I don't know how many is required for an acre.
Yeah.
But it get tremendous.
And the price will go down. That price will probably go down a lot faster than the price of, say, CBD would go down, because it just more than likely will, according to the economists. So but it is a place to potentially get into the market and make some money. Now, it's not float; it has to be overhead watered plants, so they're not the float system. But that's not a big. That's not a big change. Yeah,
because aquifers here, it's pretty readily accessible in the eastern part of the state.
So that's another way it can do it. I think there is a lot of potential here. I think that we're trying to provide as much help as we can. So it's a very changing market. It's a very changing. We keep learning new things. It's the Wild West out there, as we always say, as far as marketing and buying. What we're trying to do to help folks, first of all, is NCDA has a website, which if you just Google hemp NCDA, it'll come right to you. NC State has a very comprehensive website that's got our people listed, who the experts are. We try to keep news up on there as much as possible. We've also got places where people can buy and sell plants and other things, and that's industrialhemp.ces.ncsu.edu. So that's a place to go to get virtually any information that we have. The other place that they can email questions to is industrialhemp@ncsu.edu, or industrialhemprequests@ncagr.gov, which is the NCDA. So those are some of the resources that we have available.
And we'll try to jot some of those down, and if our folks and our videography people can get them on the page, maybe shoot some of those on there. I don't know whether they'll be able to do it or not, but we'll try to do that.
Okay.
And as we talk about this, one of the things that's kind of fascinating to me in just the past few minutes, for those folks maybe just tuning in, we've actually covered 3 or 4 different specific areas a potential financial gain for farmers that could, given the trajectory of where this has been going just in the past 6 months, could be a very a wealthy resource. And I underline that word "could be," or those two words very, very heavily underline it, because I mean I can't predict it, and certainly you can't. But it does appear that there's a profitability stream here, at least for a few years, as this thing matures and we see where it's going.
Yeah, and it's hard to say when we're just talking about it as farming, but what I'm seeing is multi-million-dollar companies buying into it. And I think those people are a lot smarter on business than I am, and if they're buying into it, there's probably going to be a future there.
And one of the things that also strikes me is that as I look at, again, some of the models that are already out there as it relates to profitability models in agriculture, it just strikes me, and W. Edwards Deming, Dr. Deming was the guy that talked a lot about systemic thinking and those kinds of things. They're going to look at the system that has actually given them huge wealth, and they're going to say, if I take this same system and I template it on this thing called cannabis, can I make this work as easily? And it could be a no-brainer. And then all of a sudden you'll see 4 or 5 major integrators, and they'll say to farmers, we'll give you X number of dollars. So, because farmers oftentimes are just very excited about getting an assured amount of money.
Yeah, yeah. And as I say, that a lot of these processors do, the better ones do have price sheets out there now, and it'll say, you know, how much per pound, and then it's based on the percent CBD, so you can see what they would pay.
So given the conversation that we've had, and we've talked about CBD, and we talked about THC, so the increase in the amount of CBD, is that does it increase equally? Does THC increase equally as the CBD increases? Are they equally?
Well, they've been able to breed plants that are high in CBD and low in THC.
Okay, so it's not necessarily I'm producing CBD, so therefore automatically I'm high in THC.
No,
you may be about 0.3.
Right. There's when you go out, if a grower would get into this and start investigating different varieties, there are varieties that are marketed specifically as high CBD. And of course they cost more, but then at the end you should have a higher CBD percentage.
And the other thing, again, looking at it from a financial perspective as well, investors that are interested in investing, what I call investment pools, where a number of people get together and invest $10,000, $20,000, and you got 10 people and that kind of thing. Do you see that kind of thing happening? Have you heard any conversation about that, where folks maybe are like you or I, that maybe are going to be retired soon or what have you?
Yeah.
Is some of that, is it still too risky, or are they looking for a finite return on their money?
No, I think it's probably not too risky for people that do that sort of. I haven't heard of any folks doing that. But like I say, there's all sorts of big investment companies that are looking at it, and so I think the small guy can get into it with pooled money like that and probably make money if they make good decisions.
Well, I'm going to give you about a minute here to wrap up. I know there's some programs coming up around the state that North Carolina State is supporting, and you guys everything is kind of connected to NC State and ag in the world that I'm in here, and there's a huge connectivity between you guys and Steve Troxler's operation as well. Any of these kinds of things, are you seeing other kinds of workshops and seminars coming up that farmers can go to? Yeah,
we've got a number of seminars or workshops that are going to be in county extension offices typically. There was the next one that I'm aware of is January 30th. It's up in Jefferson, North Carolina, the Family Central Enterprise Corporation, but you can get online and look at the extension websites to find these too. Madison County's having one. Down east here, Columbus County is having one on the 22nd of Friday, on the 22nd of February, excuse me. Then on the 25th of February, there's the Industrial Hemp Summit, which is really more for industry people and people that have been in it a little while, but anybody could attend and see where the future is perhaps. That's going to be on the 25th of February, and then Pitt County's having one on the 28th. Brunswick County's having one as well. I don't remember the exact date, but it's in early March, I believe. Well,
there's going to be a lot of these going around, so to your point, go to the website, Check out the information. If you have questions, read thoroughly, talk to a lot of folks. And a lot of the extension people, you got specialists in the extension agency there that are specialists in this. So I want to thank you again for being with us, and we're kind of running short on time, and look forward to having you again. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. We look forward to seeing you again next week on Tuesday at 2:30, as We Should Know airs each and every Tuesday. Stay tuned, and may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.